Let's find out more about the importance of the NPC session. Joining us now is Dali in Chicago. He is a political scientist at the University of Chicago and an expert on Chinese politics. So let's just frame it that way. How important is the NPC in China's policymaking?
Well, in fact, it is highly ritualized, but it's also extremely important because it's the only forum whereby national priorities are debated and discussed. And of course, it begins with the premier making a State of the Union report, essentially the American version, reviewing the developments in the past year, but also outlining the priorities for the current year. So in that sense, many issues would be actually reviewed and discussed. And more importantly also, this is the only area where provincial delegations come together from across the country. They may be all elites, they may not be sort of popularly elected, but nonetheless, by representing the entire country, it provides a very unique forum for the country to come to some sort of consensus. For example, what would be the growth rate for the country this year? Will the premier guide down China's growth rate again, like he did last year? So in that sense, actually, many of those issues would be discussed.
And of course, there are a lot of issues percolating: anti-corruption, the environment, income inequality. But there's a survey out from China's youth Dali that shows that food safety is also a top concern of the Chinese people. What's your take on that?
Well, food safety is only one of a whole cluster of quality of life issues that the Chinese have become much more interested in recent years, partly in response to real-life concerns, for example, the melamine milk scandal, the environmental pollution issues. But it also shows that increasingly China is a country of middle-class people living in cities and very concerned about those issues. And of course, they also demand change. And in that regard, actually, the food safety is just one of the many issues. And of course, parents increasingly are buying, for example, baby formulas from abroad because they only have one child and they want to do the best for their only baby.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the military budget. It's continuing to go up by about 10%. And, you know, the question comes to mind, should other countries in the area be fearful?
Well, there are two sides to this issue. On the one hand, obviously, China has been growing its military budget by double digits for the last 20-plus years. But of course, it started at a relatively low level. Even now, at 165 billion, so sort of it's large, and in fact, it's the second largest, but it's also dwarfed by the U.S. military budget. But of course, military spending does not occur in a vacuum, because what China does will also be percolating across the region. So some of the neighbors naturally would actually be watching very keenly. And of course, they may also increase their own spending. So there is always some sort of a zero-sum situation when military spending is involved.
And as you mentioned, the United States spends somewhere in the neighborhood of $660 billion. So definitely dwarfs the Chinese expenditures there. What can we expect from Premier Li's report, would you say?
I think the most important number that people watching would be how low will be the Chinese growth rate for the current year. Will he be guiding the Chinese economy to 7%, for example? Last year, it was at 7.5%, and the real growth in the end was 7.4%. But of course, there are speculations that the actual growth was lower than that potentially. And of course, the first quarter in China, the industrial sector has been really in the doldrums. But at the same time, services are expanding somewhat better. So in that sense, actually, what the central leadership says and guides will be keenly watched. And in fact, not just in China, but also on Wall Street.
Okay. Dali joining us from Chicago. Thanks so much.